Hello, Goat Format Duelists. Welcome to Goat Duelists. Today, I'm going to be reacting to a video that I made 4 years ago. It was the first Goat Format strategy video that I ever made. It was called Top 8 Misunderstood Cards in Goat Format. And this video went on to get over 17,000 views. It actually is my most watched Goat Format video ever. In YouTube analytics, I can always see, hundreds of people are still watching this video every month. So I'm going to go over the 8 cards that I said were the most misunderstood in GOAT format and say how I think my comments on each card aged. Whether I think, oh yeah, I was totally right, or no, I was wrong. I was actually the one who misunderstood these cards. So let's see. What do we got for number 8? We've got Compulsory Evacuation Device.
So I'm going to go ahead and get started with my number 8, which is Compulsory Evacuation Device. And the reason that this is on my list is basically because no one is really talking about this card, and I think people should. I think it should be considered as a viable option. So yeah, basically, my point here was that in 2018, almost no one played this card main or side, and it is a decent card, right? It is a card that does things that other cards don't do. However, Compulsory Evacuation Device, I don't think it ever really caught on, and I don't think players are making a mistake. I think for the most part, this card is played appropriately today, which is usually not at all. But one of the main points that I was making is that sometimes it can be better than Book of Moon. In 2018, people had the view that, oh yeah, Compulsory Evacuation Device, that's just a worse version of Book of Moon, which isn't true. What we did see is that, not really so much today, but back in maybe 2020 or so, some Warrior decks did play this as like a one-of, because the idea was I'd rather have it than Book of Moon, because it's better at countering Thousand Eyes, and it's better at saving my monsters, right? If you're trying to protect your Kaiku from a Snatch Steal, let's say, you'd rather Compulse it than Book it, right? So that was why you did see Warriors playing this card as like a one-of for a little while, and then, also better against Thousand Eyes. You'd rather Compulse the Thousand Eyes than Book it. But for the most part, it's not super good. Not because Book of Moon's better. You don't really see Book of Moon played much anymore either. So I was kind of right that it can be a viable alternative to Book of Moon, but at the same time, Book of Moon isn't quite as great as it used to be. So I'd give myself a solid C on this, maybe a C+, but probably a C, just because I was right for the most part that it is a viable alternative to Book of Moon, but at the same time didn't really catch on either. So let's move on to number 7. Magical Merchant is an interesting card to talk about, and that's because, a lot of people say Magical Merchant is good in GOAT control and bad in Chaos. And, I kind of think it's more of the opposite.
So, regarding Merchant, I think I got a lot of things right. Especially, you got to put this in context. Realize that in 2018, Magical Merchant was considered a 2-of staple in every GOAT control deck. And the point that I was making here is that Magical Merchant doesn't really do enough in GOAT control. And, for years I was saying, oh, Merchant's not good in GOAT control, Merchant's not good in GOAT control. People didn't really listen to me. But then after a while, we saw that, yeah, GOAT control decks actually did stop playing Magical Merchant. So I think my comments there aged pretty well. And the reason that Merchant isn't that good in GOAT control, so in 2018, people had this view that, oh, Merchant's this kind of flexible card. It does a lot of different things that help you. So it's a light, which is good for BLS. It's a level 1, which is good for Metamorphosis. We can flip it, draw a card, combo with Tsukiyomi. I might mill my Sinister Serpent. I might mill my Air Knight and get it back with Premature Burial. So it's kind of like, oh, it does all of these little helpful things. But the problem is all of those things, weren't that strong. So it was kind of this jack of all trades, master of none. And what we've seen in GOAT format is that players have gotten better, decks have gotten better, and the bar for what constitutes a good card is just way higher in 2022 than it was in 2018. And Merchant just stopped meeting that bar pretty shortly after I made this video, actually. And so yeah, I think my comments in that regard aged well. What we've seen is that GOAT control decks have shifted to playing more high-impact cards. And in general, just to take kind of a side tangent here, my philosophy in Yu-Gi-Oh! Has always been to try to play the most high impact cards. Even when I played advanced format, I would often take decks that other people were playing, sort of cut the low impact cards, add more high impact cards, and just doing that was a lot of how I was successful in Yu-Gi-Oh! That was kind of what I did with the last YCS I entered, which is Monarchs in 2015. I kind of took the standard Monarch deck that people were playing, cut all the low impact cards, added high impact cards, made top 32 at that event. So, but regarding Magical Merchant, the thing that I think I got wrong was that I was right, hey, this card isn't high impact enough in GOAT control, but then I went on to say, oh, but you should play it in Chaos. And I was kind of wrong about that. 99% of the Chaos decks we see today don't play Magical Merchant, and that's for the same reasons that GOAT control decks don't play it. It's just not high impact enough. So I think I was mostly right, but I think I was almost more right than I expected to be. It was not only not good enough in GOAT control, but not good enough in Chaos either. So because I was kind of wrong on the Chaos front, but had sort of the basic idea correct at a time when most people didn't, because of that, I'd give myself a B+ as far as how my comments aged.
Number 6 is Morphing Jar. And Morphing Jar, when you ask people about this card, you can kind of, like, hear things on all parts of the spectrum. There's some people who think, oh my god, this card is, like, you know, the fourth Trinity piece, it's broken. And then there's some people who are like, oh yeah, Morphing Jar, like, that card's terrible. Why would anyone play it? And that's because, like, it can really be either one. It can.
So, yeah, regarding Morphing Jar, I think I had some good ideas here. If anything, I think in this video I was a little non-committal. I just kind of said, oh, Morphing Jar can be good, Morphing Jar can be bad. You know, you see I have some good points under both. I will say, like, under the bad, I think, you know, I have some correct things there. In the sense that, realize again, we have to put this in context. In 2018, most Chaos decks were playing Morphing Jar. Because first of all, just the philosophy behind Chaos was different then. Like I talked about in, I think, one of my videos last week, at the time, you know, people called the deck Chaos Turbo because you used Morphing Jar and Cyber Jar to draw a bunch of cards and then turbo out your Chaos monsters. That was the idea. That was why the deck was called Chaos Turbo. Today, it's not really like that. But I was kind of making the point back then in 2018. I'm like, hey, Morphing Jar isn't a light or dark. And at the same time, like, Chaos decks kind of usually play a lot of monsters. So it's kind of hard to, like, set your whole hand with Morphing Jar. And I was right about that. We see today that Chaos decks almost never play Morphing Jar. Like, probably more than 99% of the time, Chaos deck not playing Morphing Jar. And then in this video, I sort of went on to sort of make the point that, a lot of how good Morphing Jar is, it depends on whether or not your opponent is, like, playing around it. So what sort of happened in 2018 was a lot of decks are playing Morphing Jar. Probably 75% of decks are playing Morphing Jar. And because of that, people would always play around it, right? They'd always set their chops before attacking a face-down monster. And because people were so careful about playing around it, particularly at the higher levels, Morphing Jar kind of became this mediocre card that people started cutting it from their decks. And now what we see today is kind of the opposite, where most decks don't play Morphing Jar, and now people stop playing around it. Even in my, 6 common misplays video or whatever, I said, hey, a lot of people don't set their chops anymore before attacking a set monster. And, like, some people in the comments actually thought that I was wrong about that. That, like, oh, no, you should never set your chops before attacking a set monster. So, I mean, my opinion now is that, like, if everyone's just doing that, if everyone's just not playing around morphing anymore, well, maybe it's time to just start playing this card again, you know? Because it is kind of this card where how good it is depends on how you play it and to what extent your opponent plays around it. So, because I didn't really elaborate on that nuance enough, you know, I think I'd give myself probably a C-. Probably a C-. I'd give my comments a C-. Because, again, I think I made some good points, but I think I didn't really go far enough at the time that I was making this video. And one thing, too, is that part of the reason Morphing Jar isn't good today is because it's just really bad against Warriors. Like, Blade Knight just kills and negates it, or Warriors can just set their whole hand and not have to discard any cards. But in 2018, no one really played Warriors, so I didn't really talk about that. But yeah, let's move on to the next card.
So, Solemn Judgment is, I'll give people some credit. A couple of years ago, I think the GOAT format was just oversaturated with this card. People were just playing it in like any deck, and they just didn't realize the downsides to the card. Whereas I think now, I for the most part, I only see people playing it in decks where it's warranted. But there are some exceptions, which is...
So, yeah, it's interesting. At the time that I made this video, I see that I said, oh, you know, people kind of used to throw it in everything, but they've sort of stopped. Now I think we've kind of swung the other direction, and we've almost gone back to throwing it in a lot of decks again. Not in everything necessarily, but I've tried playing Chaos decks with Solemn Judgment and without Solemn Judgment, and I've also watched other people play. And, I mean, Solemn Judgment, of course, it can be a very strong card, but overall, I would say Solemn Judgment is not a good card in your average Chaos deck. Of course, there can be some exceptions. Maybe you're playing, like, the Mask Tsukiyomi version or whatever. But in sort of, like, your average Chaos deck, I don't think Solemn Judgment is that great. Just because paying 4,000 life in the early game, I mean, you could just lose the game because of that. I've seen it happen all the time. I know people will maybe say, like, oh, I like Solemn Judgment against combo. But even when I'm playing, like, Reason Negate, often what happens is, you know, I activate True Nade, they Solemn, and then it's like, oh, well, now since they only have 4,000, I can just kill them now. So, yeah, I think people are still overrating this card. Now, I will say something that I didn't touch on in the video is Solemn Judgment is absolutely amazing in Warriors. Because in Warriors, you basically just don't care about your life at all. Like, as long as you have enough to not get ringed for game, that's basically all you care about. So, like, in Warriors, the card is absolutely amazing. You know, in like a lockdown burn deck with wave motion cannon or whatever, okay, you're going to play Solemn in that too. You're going to play Solemn in, I don't know, you know, Pac-Man or something. But in your average, like, control deck, I think Solemn's not that good, which is, you know, that's what I said there. So here I'd give myself, maybe a C+, because, you know, I think I was kind of right about the ideas that I was putting out there, but I guess maybe other people thought I was wrong, because it seemed like Solemn actually maybe got a teensy bit more popular after I made this video. And then, of course, I was right that it's, you know, it's great in the late game, which I will say sometimes I see, like, Chaos decks only playing, like, 1 or 2 copies of Solemn, which I think is better than playing 3, because realize that, statistically speaking, the fewer copies of a card you play, the later you will see it on average, right? So, of course, if you play 1 Solemn, yes, you could open your 1 Solemn, but statistically speaking, the average turn that you see your first Solemn will be a higher number than if you play 3. So let's move on.
So, my number 4 is Trap Dustshoot. And to this day, I still see people siding in this card when they really shouldn't be. There's this myth in GOAT format, I think, that, like, you should side this in when you're going first, like, against just any deck.
So yeah, Trap Dustshoot is definitely in a very different place today than it was in 2018 when I made this video. Back in 2018, what we actually saw was that a lot of people would side deck Trap Dustshoot, but not main it. Whereas today, it's kind of the opposite. I feel like people are either maining it or not playing at all. And in that regard, people today are definitely playing this card way better than people were in 2018. So, you know, I was right that I said, yes, this isn't a card that you just side in because you're going first. I mean, occasionally I do see people making that mistake where I might be playing, I don't know, I might be playing a deck like Warriors, and people will side in Dustshoot against me just because they're going first. So this is a card that is good or bad in certain matchups. It has nothing to do with, like, whether or not you're going first, guys. Don't side it out just because you're going second. Don't side it in just because you're going first. I was right about that. However, the thing that I think I was wrong about at the time that I made this video is I kind of had the view that, oh, in control mirrors, there's no point in really siding in Dustshoot because it's sort of a slow, grindy match, and Dustshoot just isn't going to be good enough in that kind of matchup. But today what we see is that control, of course, is still sort of the most popular deck style in GOAT format, but in a lot of control mirrors, you do see Trap Dustshoot being very powerful, particularly, you know, if it's Chaos versus Chaos. Trap Dustshoot, you know, very good with Wing Blast. I love the Chaos lineup of 3 Wing Blasts, 2 Dustshoot. So because I didn't really get that right, because I kind of had the narrow view that, oh, Trap Dustshoot is only good if it's, like, aggro versus control, you know, because of that, I would give myself, Probably a D plus here. You know, I was right that like people were playing the card wrong, but I think I kind of underestimated this card, and because of that, yes, Chop Dustshoot was misunderstood, but I was one of the people who misunderstood it.
So Scapegoat is a very interesting card that I think a lot of people don't talk about enough. And we all know why Scapegoat is good, I think. Stops OTKs, right? You can, if your life points are getting low, you can use it to buy yourself some time. Obviously, it has great synergy with Metamorphosis, as we all know, but also with Creature Swap and United We Stand. But on the other hand, the reason why Scapegoat, I think, isn't nearly as popular as it used to be is because of the fact that it doesn't really like answer any threats by itself, right? So your opponent attacks the monster, you Scapegoat, but that hasn't changed the fact that your opponent still has a monster in play.
So regarding Scapegoat, it's actually interesting. I do remember around the time I made this video, Chris Provic actually commented and said, "Oh, I thought you made some really good points about Scapegoat." So, if he thinks that I was right, it means I was probably right. And again, to put this in context, in 2018, what we saw is almost like every Goat Control deck just played 2 copies of this card, right? I mean, it was just a card that like every deck played 2 of, and I was kind of saying like, hey, maybe we should put a little more thought into this, right? Maybe we should play 3, or maybe we should not play it at all. Like, it doesn't have to be this card that we just blindly play 2 of. And I think I was pretty right about that. I mean, today we do see that most Goat Control decks actually do play 3 Scapegoat. Some do play 2, but most play 3. And I have there under the bed, not as good against aggro as it used to be. Keep in mind, in 2018, most aggro decks played like King Tiger Wengu and Azura Priest. Today, of course, that's not the case. Today, actually, Scapegoat is very good against aggro, which is why most Goat Control decks today do play 3 Scapegoat. So I was, a little wrong about how good it is against aggro. But, I think overall I was right about the pros and cons. I think I was right that people needed to put a little more thought into this choice, whether 2 copies of Scapegoat was really right for their deck. So I think I'd give myself a B+ here on how my comments aged.
Number 2, Thunder Dragon. Obviously, everyone knows I'm going to put this on my list. I of course, how should I say this? I used to be on the anti-Thunder Dragon train. I was telling people that this card is awful, and you're an idiot if you play it. I have since softened up my view on the card, right? And I'll tell you one reason why I've softened up my view on the card, and that is because Thunder Dragon is really, really good with card destruction. So, a lot of the earlier sort of Thunder Dragon Chaos decks, they were playing they had some really weird choices. A lot of them were playing, Thunder Dragons with, not really much to go with it. They were kind of, playing, Scapegoats and Metamorphoses.
So here, I think I really had the right idea. I of course said that, I used to think this card is bad, now I don't anymore. And today, I think some people don't realize this, but, people for some reason always think that I'm, still playing Angel Chaos, whereas usually if I play Chaos today, I am using Thunder Dragon as my light rather than Shining Angel. And that really goes back to the point that I made earlier in this video, which is that GOAT format, the bar has been raised. You gotta play cards that are high impact now. And Thunder Dragon does have the potential to be a very high impact card, which was kind of what I was saying in this video of, this card's really good with card destruction. It's really good if you build around it. At the time, in 2018, you did see a lot of decks that kind of just threw in Thunder Dragon for no reason. Like a Goat Control deck that would just throw in, 3 Thunder Dragons and, 1 Chaos Sorcerer. Or, I don't know, even to some extent, even, a Warrior deck that would, throw in 3 Thunder Dragons. And I do still see a little bit of that today. But for the most part, people have kind of figured out that Thunder Dragon is best when you build around it, when you have things to do with those Thunder Dragons in your hand. This is not a card that is individually strong. By itself, it's pretty bad, but if you build around it, it is absolutely amazing, right? Thunder Dragon Graceful is amazing. Thunder Dragon Card Destruction is amazing. Just going I'm gonna Wing Blast your guy, discard a Thunder Dragon. Oh, next turn, Wing Blast your guy again, discard a Thunder Dragon. It is very strong. We see today that Chaos decks with Thunder Dragon win quite a lot, and that is for good reason. So I think to a large extent, I maybe didn't emphasize enough at the time I made this video how good this card can be if you build around it. But I was right about the fact that it is a build around card, right? If you just throw it in any deck, the card's gonna suck. That's still true. So overall, I think I would give myself an A- here. I was, at the time I made this video, I was starting to catch on. Thunder Dragon, this card is better than I thought it was. But you have to build around it. And I was pretty much right about that. But it ended up being a little better than I thought it would be.
Is Metamorphosis. And I know this is going to seem weird to people, but this is another card that I think people need to be talking about more. And again, I think a lot of GOAT players are getting lazy. A few years ago, Chris Perovic, he really revolutionized the game with his 2 Scapegoat, 3 Metamorphosis GOAT control, and he had a pretty simple theory at the time, and that was Metamorphosis is great in GOAT mirrors. Everyone else is playing 2 of this card, so I'm going to play 3, and I'm going to win the GOAT mirror because of it. And that was a pretty good theory at the time. But things have changed a bit. Instead of playing cards like Exarian Universe, typically now GOAT Control is played with no Exarians, and now you see GOAT Control playing cards like Azura Priest as their aggressive option, which Metamorphosis doesn't stop. And then they're just kind of playing like a lot of flip effects. And, Metamorphosis, it's very good against face-up monsters, right? If your opponent summons monster and attacks you with it, and you go Scapegoat to block the hit and Metamorphosis, and then take their guy and then start hitting them with it, that's great. On the other hand, if you take, like, a face-down monster, unless you have, like, a Tsukiyomi to loop it, or you contribute it for Air Knight, your opponent can just sit there and do nothing.
So, regarding Metamorphosis, context, again, is every GOAT Control deck played, like, 2 Scapegoat, 3 Metamorphosis, 2 Tsukiyomi. That was the meta in 2018. And it's surprising, because Metamorphosis was considered this, like, 3-of amazing card. Oh my god, Metamorphosis is, like, the end-all, be-all of GOAT format. Everyone's got to play this. And, again, I don't think I went quite far enough with the points that I was making here. Again, I almost feel like I didn't put enough faith in my own predictions. So I always tried to sort of, like, hedge my bets and say, well, it can be good, can be bad, whatever. But really what I was starting to realize in 2018 was that this card has some major downsides that people weren't talking about in 2018. This card is not the end-all, be-all of GOAT format. And what we see today is that Metamorphosis as a card is much less common than it used to be, right? We know today, of course, that, yeah, Metamorphosis, not only is it not the end-all, be-all of GOAT format, there are plenty of cards that are just better than this, right? I mean, one of the things that I didn't talk about in this video, which, that's my bad, is how it matches up against Chaos Sorcerer, right? Of course, we know that Thousand Eyes can take a Chaos Sorcerer, and Chaos Sorcerer can remove a Thousand Eyes. But generally speaking, Chaos Sorcerer is sort of the better card in the head-to-head because it's easier to meet the requirements for Chaos Sorcerer, right? A Light in the Dark in the grave is easier to get than a level 1 on the field. And like I talked about in the video, it can be, meta can be a -1, whereas Sorcerer really can't ever be a -1. So that's part of the reason that we see that Sorcerer is viewed as the better card today. But yeah, because of the fact that I was catching on to the downsides of Metamorphosis at a time where it was considered like a 3-of staple, I know I'm tooting my own horn. I know some people in the comments are just going to say, oh, ACP is just blowing himself here. But I really do think that I deserve a lot of credit for, in 2018, realizing that, like, hey, this card is not as good as people think it is. But again, Chaos was played in 2018, so no excuses for that. No excuses for me not calling out the fact that this card was bad against Chaos. And one of the things, too, that sort of happened that I didn't mention in this video, I mean, you'll notice that under the good I have, oh, you can lock with Tsukiyomi. But part of what happened is Tsukiyomi became less good, and because of the fact that GOAT Control decks started playing, like, 1 or sometimes even 0 copies of Tsukiyomi, we also saw that meta wasn't as good, right? Because if the things that synergize with meta aren't as good, then that means meta isn't as good either. I also put, Thousand Eyes is a dark. That can be a little relevant for GOAT Control, but in general, that doesn't matter very much. Of course, still good at stopping aggression. I mean, all of these points here are valid, under the good and the bad. But again, I think the main mistake was that I didn't go far enough and say that, hey guys, not only is meta not as good as you think it is, but it is downright bad in certain matchups. And what we've seen is that, again, the bar in GOAT format has been raised, and because of that, I think meta is almost, it's not too situational. Like, meta still does see play, but I think part of the reason that it doesn't see as much play is that it is kind of a situational card, right? In comparison to Chaos Sorcerer, it is situational. In comparison to Chaos Sorcerer, it is higher risk in the sense that you can go -1. So I didn't talk about all of that. But the fact that I kind of put myself out there and said, hey, this amazing 3-of card that everyone has to play isn't as good as you think it is, and because I made it number 1 on my list, I think this aged incredibly well 4 years later, and because of that, I would give this prediction, or this, my thoughts on this card an A. So let me know how you guys think my comments aged. I mean, do you think they aged well? Do you think some of them aged not so well? And let me know if you want me to make a new list of the most misunderstood cards in 2022, because, of course, if I was making a list today, I think it would be very different than it was in 2018. I think, to give everyone else a lot of credit, most of these cards on this list are today not misunderstood, right? Meta, not misunderstood. People play it where it's good, and they don't play it where it's bad. Thunder Dragon, same thing. People play it where it's good, and they don't play it where it's bad. Scapegoat, same thing. So most of these cards on this list today are not misunderstood. People understand that meta isn't as good as it used to be. Merchant isn't as good as it used to be. So what do you think? Do you think I should do a new list? Let me know in the comments. And as usual, thanks for watching.